On June 28, 2003, in the coastal town of Redwood, Oregon, 21-year-old Amanda Pierce was seen leaving the Harbor Lights nightclub just after 2:00 a.m., getting into a red 1996 Jaguar driven by 25-year-old Brian Keller, 18. At 4:15 a.m., Amanda placed a final call to her best friend, saying she was stranded on Harbor Road and couldn't get home. Minutes later, her phone went dead. She was never seen again. 0:00:36. In the following days, police seized Keller's vehicle, but it had been freshly cleaned. With no blood, no DNA, and no physical trace, the case stalled. 00:52. For 6 years, the file sat cold, until March 2009, when heavy floods along the Redwood River exposed a mud-soaked shoe later identified as the pair Amanda wore that night. 01:10. That discovery reopened the investigation and raised a chilling question. If the red Jaguar wasn't the only answer, who else was there with Amanda on the night she disappeared? 01:25. This is the story of a case that refuses to fade. Subscribe and stay with us as we retrace every step that still matters today. On the western edge of Oregon, tucked between pine forests and the cold, persistent tides of the Pacific, the small port town of Redwood rarely made headlines. It was the kind of place where boats bobbed gently in the harbor, the air always faintly salty, and every summer night seemed to carry the same predictable rhythm. Laughter echoing from waterfront bars, neon signs flickering over sidewalks, young people chasing the last notes of freedom before responsibility set in. Amanda Pierce was 21, and in many ways, a classic child of Redwood. She'd grown up in the same white clapboard house on Pine Street since kindergarten, had the same group of friends since middle school, and even after community college graduation in June, she came home every night to her childhood bedroom, its walls still covered with band posters and sketches of dream cities she longed to visit someday. She was responsible, always early to work at the art supply store, and fiercely protective of her younger brother. Yet, like most people her age, Amanda was restless for something different, something that shimmered just beyond the safe, familiar edges of town. July 19, 2003, started with the promise of a perfect summer night. Amanda pulled on her favorite denim jacket and texted her best friend Haley, "Let's do something wild tonight." They laughed about it as they met up outside the Lighthouse, Redwood's most popular nightclub, a squat building whose dance floor throbbed with music every weekend. By 10 p.m., the line to get in curled around the block. Everyone dressed in their weekend best, the air electric with possibility. Inside, the world was all color and sound. Amanda moved easily between friends, never one to hog the spotlight, but always quick with a smile, happy to spin in and out of conversations. The DJ was playing early 2000s hits, the kind that made everyone forget whatever troubled them. Every so often, she glanced toward the bar, where an unfamiliar man sat, tall and sharp-jawed, tapping his fingers to the beat and nursing a drink that never seemed to empty. Later, friends would try to recall what was odd about him. His expensive red sports car parked right out front, maybe, or the way his eyes kept drifting back to Amanda as she laughed with her friends. As midnight bled into morning, the crowd thinned and the music slowed. Amanda, never a heavy drinker, sipped her soda and considered calling it a night, but Haley convinced her to stay for just one more song. Outside, a warm wind was rising, carrying the tang of the ocean up Harbor Road. Streetlights glowed against the growing darkness. It felt like any other night. Amanda's phone buzzed. It was her brother asking if she'd be home soon. She promised she wouldn't be late. As the clock ticked past 1 a.m., people began to drift out in pairs or groups. Someone announced there was a house party across town. The invitations spread like wildfire. Amanda hesitated, glancing at her watch, but Haley begged her to come. She relented, stepping outside with the group, the laughter fading as the doors swung shut behind them. Parked beneath the street lamp was the red car, sleek, polished, and entirely out of place in Redwood. The stranger leaned against it, chatting easily with some of the other clubgoers. He introduced himself as Brian Keller. Nobody knew him well, but his charm was magnetic, and he seemed to know just what to say to draw people in. "Need a ride to the party?" he asked, gesturing to his car. Amanda paused, unsure. Haley nudged her. "Come on, just this once." She slid into the passenger seat, the leather cold against her bare legs. Brian grinned and pulled out onto Harbor Road, the taillights painting streaks of red across the asphalt. Haley and the others piled into another car, promising to meet them there. As they sped away, Amanda watched the familiar storefronts blur by. She pulled out her phone to text Haley, but the signal flickered in and out. The road grew darker as they left downtown behind. Nobody would remember exactly what route Brian took. Some later said they saw the red car at a gas station. Others recalled seeing Amanda at the house party, chatting with new faces, her laughter a little louder than usual. But somewhere between the nightclub, the winding turns of Harbor Road, and the promise of a wild summer night, Amanda vanished from the world she knew. Hours later, the sun would rise over Redwood, painting the rooftops gold. Her family would wake to an empty room, her bed neatly made, her phone unanswered. At first, no one panicked. Young people stayed out late, after all, and Amanda was always responsible. But as morning stretched into afternoon and her phone went straight to voicemail, the sinking dread began to settle. The town would never be the same. The haunting question lingered in every conversation, every news report, every sleepless night. How can a young woman simply disappear into the night? As days passed, the normal rhythms of Redwood slowed. Parents began to watch their children more closely. Friends whispered theories in hushed tones. The Pierce family left Amanda's porch light burning, a beacon against the growing darkness. And somewhere, the red car was gone, leaving only a trace of tire marks on the road, and a silence that would haunt the town for years to come. Amanda Pierce's world had always been bounded by the gentle curves of Redwood, Oregon. Her life traced the town's familiar streets, from her family's weathered house on Pine Street to the faded brick building of Redwood Community College and the downtown strip where she worked part-time at an art supply store. If Redwood was small, Amanda filled it with big dreams, always sketching out futures in her journals, moving to Portland, designing album covers, finding her own way in a bigger world. Her walls were plastered with magazine clippings and drawings of far-off cities, reminders that she was never content to let her life shrink to fit the town's narrow borders. Amanda was the eldest of 2 children, with a fierce sense of responsibility that never seemed to weigh her down. Her parents, Jim and Linda, worked hard, her dad at the shipyard, her mom at the local elementary school. Their love for Amanda and her little brother Ethan was steady, if sometimes quiet. Amanda was the one who reminded everyone to lock the doors at night, who made sure Ethan finished his homework, who cooked dinner when her parents worked late. There was warmth in everything she did, from the way she greeted the regulars at the store to the time she spent helping her neighbors with small chores. Everyone in Redwood knew Amanda. She was the girl you could trust, the one who never let you down. Yet there was another side to her, a side restless with ambition, quietly fighting against the town's slow rhythm. She devoured design magazines, spent nights learning Photoshop on her old laptop, and dreamed of getting accepted into a university art program. Amanda wanted more than just to exist in Redwood. She wanted to leave her mark on the world. But whenever those dreams felt too big or the world too uncertain, she always returned home, to the familiar comfort of her family's laughter and the steady pulse of the sea. Redwood itself was a place of contrasts, as beautiful as it was treacherous. By day, the harbor bustled with the sound of gulls and the clatter of fishing boats. Tourists wandered the boardwalk in search of saltwater taffy and crab cakes. The beaches stretched for miles, littered with driftwood and shells, and on summer afternoons, kids raced their bikes along the sand, while their parents grilled fish in the shade of the dunes. But beneath the postcard surface, trouble simmered. Years of economic decline had left the town vulnerable to shadows. A drug problem festered in the alleys behind the main strip. Nightclubs like the Lighthouse, once a harmless escape, became magnets for rowdy outsiders and rougher crowds. The police kept a close watch, but trouble had a way of slipping through the cracks. Amanda was aware of those dangers. Her parents' warnings, the stories whispered at sleepovers, the memorial bench down by the docks for a boy lost to drugs the summer before. But like most young people in Redwood, she refused to live in fear. She moved through the town's darker corners with caution, always promising to stick with friends, never accepting rides from strangers. She believed she knew how to keep herself safe. That faith, more than anything, was what made her disappearance so terrifying to those who knew her. The days after Amanda vanished were suffocating in their uncertainty. Her mother paced the living room, clutching Amanda's favorite sweater, unable to sleep in the room where her daughter's laughter had once filled the air. Her father roamed the town at dawn and dusk, searching for any sign, her shoe, her phone, a strand of her hair. Ethan, only 14, retreated into silence, refusing to touch Amanda's untouched sketchbooks. Neighbors arrived with casseroles and hollow words of comfort. Amanda's friends created missing posters, their hands shaking as they taped them to every window and utility pole. At night, the family's small house glowed softly with candlelight, a vigil that seemed both desperate and hopeful. Redwood itself changed in subtle ways. Parents tightened their grip on their children's curfews. The chatter in coffee shops took on a new edge. Old wounds and suspicions resurfacing as people wondered who, if anyone, could be trusted. The river, usually sparkling and inviting in the summer, seemed darker somehow. Even the gulls quieted, as if the whole town was holding its breath. As the search dragged on, Amanda's memory became a rallying point, a symbol of innocence lost. Strangers joined hands at prayer vigils, their candles flickering in the ocean breeze. Classmates shared stories of Amanda's kindness, the time she stayed late to help a friend pass a math test, or how she stood up for a new girl being bullied. Every day, her story echoed on local radio, her face appearing on news bulletins and in newspapers, her name becoming a mantra of hope and fear. But underneath the collective grief, an unspoken terror grew. If Amanda, the town's golden girl, could simply vanish, then who was truly safe? Redwood, so sure of itself, now lived in the shadow of a question with no easy answer. Somewhere out there, the world Amanda longed for seemed to recede even further. All that remained was the aching absence, a life paused, a future unwritten, and the hope however faint, that the truth would one day return to the quiet streets of Redwood. The summer night that had started with such promise quickly twisted into something no one in Redwood would ever forget. The details of Amanda Pierce's disappearance became both a cautionary tale and a puzzle that the town could never quite piece together. Her movements after leaving the lighthouse were recounted and speculated upon by friends, police, and reporters alike, each trying to rewind the clock and find the moment where things shifted from safe to sinister. It was just after 1 a.m. when Amanda stepped out of the nightclub, her laughter fading into the stillness of the darkened parking lot. The red sports car, a head-turner in a place where most folks drove battered pickups or sensible sedans, waited under the harsh glow of the street lamp. Brian Keller, a man few in Redwood recognized, was already leaning against the driver's side, his smile easy and unhurried, a cigarette burning between his fingers. Some witnesses would later recall Amanda hesitating at the curb, her eyes flicking toward her friends, a silent question hanging in the humid air. Others remembered her climbing into the car without a backward glance, swept up in the adventure of an unfamiliar night. The red car slid away from the curb, its engine low and powerful, taillights disappearing into the distance. No one could say for certain which route Brian took. The house party was across town, and there were half a dozen ways to get there, winding through residential streets, over the old wooden bridge, past the shuttered cannery, and out toward the lonely stretch of Harbor Road. Maybe they stopped at the gas station on 3rd, as a clerk later insisted, a woman matching Amanda's description, buying a bottle of water and nervously checking her phone. Maybe they never made it to the party at all. What's certain is that around 4:15 a.m., Amanda's phone rang through to her best friend Haley. In that moment, a fragment of time preserved forever in a police report, Amanda's voice was different. Gone was the calm, cheerful cadence everyone knew. Instead, Haley would recall, Amanda sounded strained, her words tumbling out in a hush broken by static and muffled music. She whispered, "He won't take me home. We're somewhere along Harbor Road. I'm scared." There was a tremor in her voice, the kind that rattles even the strongest bonds of trust. Haley asked questions, her voice rising in panic, but Amanda couldn't answer them. There was a sound, like footsteps or gravel crunching, and then the call cut out. The line went dead. That was the last anyone ever heard from Amanda Pierce. In the hours after, as the sky over Redwood turned from indigo to pearl, Amanda's absence became impossible to ignore. Her parents awoke to find her bed still neatly made, the covers smooth and untouched. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By mid-morning, Haley arrived at the Pierce house, her face ashen, clutching her phone and replaying the final call over and over, searching for some overlooked clue. The family reached out to friends, retraced Amanda's steps from the night before, phoned every hospital in a 50-mile radius. No one had seen or heard from Amanda. Panic rose in waves through the town. The local police, unused to handling anything more serious than the occasional bar fight, scrambled to organize a search. Volunteers fanned out through the neighborhoods, scouring alleys and wooded lots, their flashlights trembling as they called Amanda's name. The red car was nowhere to be seen, and Brian Keller, his name passed on by word of mouth, scrawled on flyers, became a ghost the authorities desperately needed to find. The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. At the edge of town, the Harbor Road curved along the marshy banks of the Redwood River, bordered by thick woods and the looming silhouette of the abandoned mill. It was an area everyone avoided at night. rumored to be a hotspot for drug deals and unsavory characters. Search parties tramped through the weeds and mud, hearts pounding at every glint of metal or scrap of fabric. But nothing turned up. Not a shoe, not a hair, not a single clue that Amanda had ever been there. Rumors spread faster than the search. Some said Amanda had run away, though no one who truly knew her believed it. Others blamed the stranger in the red car, weaving tales of jealousy, anger, and secrets. Theories multiplied, whispered in coffee shops and classrooms, but each ended the same way, with Amanda gone, swallowed by the darkness. Days blurred into nights. The police collected security footage, conducted interviews, and issued public statements, but all they could confirm was that Amanda had left the lighthouse with Brian Keller, and at some point later, she made that chilling call from somewhere along Harbor Road. The red car was never seen on any traffic camera, and Brian's answers to questions, when they finally tracked him down, were vague at best. Amanda Pierce, the responsible daughter, the talented artist, the heart of her family and friend group, had vanished into the night, leaving behind a fractured community and a family frozen in fear. The coastal breeze that once felt refreshing now brought with it only an ache of loss, swirling through empty streets and silent homes. In Redwood, summer had lost its innocence, replaced by a haunting, echoing question. How could this happen here? And would the truth ever surface from the shadows that now clung to every corner of the town? In the hours and days after Amanda's disappearance, the Pierce family found themselves caught between disbelief and dread, trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake from. Their once ordinary life fractured overnight. Her bedroom became a shrine, a sanctuary of untouched hopes and dreams, while the rest of the house seemed to shrink under the weight of waiting. Her mother, Linda, barely slept, sitting for hours on Amanda's neatly made bed, clutching her daughter's favorite sweater as if it could anchor her to hope. Jim, her father, combed the town with haunted eyes, retracing Amanda's last known steps, searching faces in crowds for any sign of her. Her brother Ethan, suddenly smaller in the echoing house, stared for hours at Amanda's empty desk, refusing to turn on the light. It was Linda who made the first flyers, printing Amanda's smiling face above the words, "Missing Amanda Pierce." She and Jim spent that entire first day plastering them everywhere they could. Telephone poles, gas stations, the post office bulletin board, even the windows of the old bait shop by the harbor. The tape stuck awkwardly to the salt-stained glass, but they pressed it down with shaking hands, determined that Amanda's face would not disappear so easily from the world. By the second day, friends and neighbors had joined the search, fueled by sleepless worry and the hope that Amanda might still be out there, hurt, maybe, but alive. Volunteers formed search parties, sweeping through overgrown lots and along the banks of the river, calling her name until their voices cracked. At night, they gathered outside the Pierce home, lighting candles and whispering prayers into the restless wind. The small front yard glowed with a sea of trembling flames, each one a flicker of hope against the darkness that now hung over Redwood. The community, so used to the rhythms of daily life, found itself gripped by a new, persistent fear. Coffee shop conversations, once casual, now bent quickly to Amanda's story. The grocery store aisles became places for nervous speculation. Did you hear about the call she made? They say she got into a car with that stranger. Did anyone really know him? Rumors swirled, but what cut deepest was the sense of vulnerability. If someone like Amanda could vanish, who among them was truly safe? As days passed, the panic and exhaustion grew. The police set up a hotline, their officers fielding calls around the clock. each tip a lifeline, no matter how far-fetched. Parents held their children tighter, curfews were moved earlier, and young women traveled in groups even in daylight. Local churches held vigils that spilled out onto the streets. The entire town felt smaller, tighter, bound together by fear and the desperate need for answers. Inside the Pierce home, time distorted. Linda and Jim barely left the house, afraid to miss a call or a knock at the door. Linda would often wander to Amanda's bedroom, lingering at the window where a single candle glowed each night. It became a symbol for the whole community, a beacon of hope visible from the street, growing into a nightly ritual for neighbors. Children would press their faces to the glass outside, watching the tiny flame flicker, mothers squeezing their hands, silently promising to never let go. Ethan, once chatty and mischievous, became a ghost in his own home. He barely ate, his days blurring into a haze of worry and longing. He'd listen to Amanda's old playlists on repeat, the songs looping into the early morning. Sometimes, he'd kneel by her desk and trace his fingers over her sketches, wishing he could draw her back into existence. As the week wore on, the scale of the tragedy became real. Local businesses donated paper and ink for more flyers. High school students organized prayer circles. Teachers set aside time to talk about safety and support. Haley and Amanda's other close friends set up a social media campaign, pleading with anyone who'd seen or heard anything to come forward. Messages of support poured in from across the county, but so too did fear and suspicion. People questioned the safety of their own routines, looked sideways at unfamiliar cars, and wondered if they should trust even the neighbors they'd known for years. Some nights, the town seemed to hold its breath. The search parties returned home with nothing but tired eyes and mud-caked shoes. The candles on the Pierce lawn burned lower, but never out. The old men at the harbor, who had seen storms come and go, sat in silence, staring out at the black water, muttering that nothing like this had ever happened before. Amanda's absence gnawed at Redwood, hollowing out the heart of the town. Even those who didn't know her personally felt the loss as something personal, a wound that would not heal. The question echoed in every quiet room, every whispered conversation. If Amanda Pierce could simply disappear, then what was left to believe in? Each day without news chipped away at hope, yet the community refused to give up, refusing to let Amanda become just another face on a faded poster. In the darkness, the light from her bedroom window kept burning, a fragile promise that answers, somehow, someday, would come. As the days stretched into weeks, the search for Amanda Pierce became the largest investigation Redwood had ever seen. The local police, reinforced by detectives from the county, constructed a timeline, painstakingly mapping Amanda's last known movements through a haze of witness statements, camera footage, and the shifting recollections of a town in shock. It began at the Lighthouse nightclub, the glow of neon and the thrum of music now replaced in everyone's mind by Amanda's last carefree hours. From there, the story branched out like the rivers that carved through the surrounding forest. A possible sighting at a gas station, a brief stop at a house party, Amanda seen laughing in the glow of porch lights, and then the final chilling certainty, the red sports car waiting under the street lamp. Brian Keller became the focal point of the investigation almost immediately. He was 25, a newcomer to Redwood with no real ties to the community, and his arrival had been as sudden as Amanda's disappearance. Few people recalled ever seeing him before that night, and no one claimed him as a friend. He worked odd jobs up and down the coast, drifting from town to town, his past a patchwork of vague references and dead ends. Police tracked Brian down 2 days after Amanda vanished. He was calm, even polite, sitting across from detectives in a cramped interview room, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He admitted he'd given Amanda a ride that night, but claimed he'd only dropped her off near a fast food place on the edge of town, sometime after 3 in the morning. There, he insisted, she'd stepped out of the car and walked away alone, blending into the night and out of his life forever. There was no anger in his words, only the carefully measured tone of a man who knew the world was watching him closely. Detectives pushed him for details, but his story never wavered. He couldn't remember what Amanda was wearing. He didn't know anyone at the party. He didn't recall who else might have seen them together. There were gaps in his timeline, minutes and hours that slipped through his fingers like water. Yet for all their suspicions, the police had nothing solid. No physical evidence. No witnesses who could place Amanda anywhere after she stepped out of that red car. The car itself was the next focus. Officers seized it from the parking lot of a cheap motel where Brian was staying. They expected it to yield clues, a stray hair, a drop of blood, a scrap of fabric caught in the door. Instead, what they found was unsettling in its perfection. The car had been meticulously cleaned, the upholstery freshly scrubbed, the trunk empty but for a few ordinary tools. There was no trace of Amanda, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing to tie her to the vehicle at all. If the car held secrets, they were washed away before the police ever arrived. Meanwhile, witnesses from the party remembered only fragments. Some said they saw Amanda talking with a man they didn't recognize, someone tall with a faded jacket. But when shown photographs, no one could identify him. Others swore they saw Amanda leaving with Brian, her face tense. But the crowd and chaos made certainty impossible. Even the surveillance footage from the gas station was blurry and inconclusive. A young woman who might have been Amanda, but could just as easily have been someone else. The investigation churned on, fueled by frustration and the desperate hope that something, anything, would break the case open. The Pierce family clung to every new rumor, every whispered tip, never letting go of the belief that Amanda was out there, waiting to be found. But the evidence stubbornly refused to cooperate. Without blood, without DNA, without a single piece of proof that Amanda had been harmed or taken against her will, the police were left with nothing but suspicion. Brian Keller remained the prime suspect, but the law required more than instinct. The detectives circled him, searching for inconsistencies, trying to catch him in a lie, but he maintained his story. The longer the investigation dragged on, the clearer it became that the red car was a dead end. If it had ever held answers, they'd been erased by bleach and time. As summer wore on, hope turned brittle. The search parties dwindled. The flyers began to curl at the edges and fade in the sun. Amanda's candle still glowed in her bedroom window, but the world outside was moving on. In Redwood, the name Brian Keller became a warning, a symbol of the town's collective unease. Parents warned their children never to accept rides from strangers, and every unfamiliar car drew suspicion. The frustration was palpable, so many threads, yet nothing to tie them together. With no physical evidence, the investigation stalled. Amanda Pierce remained missing, her story suspended in a limbo of unanswered questions, while Brian Keller walked free, his past and present forever entwined with the night Amanda vanished. The town waited, restless and wounded, as the case that had shattered their sense of safety slipped further and further into the shadows. As summer faded into fall, the momentum behind the search for Amanda Pierce slowed, then faltered. The police investigation, once so urgent, lost its rhythm under the weight of dead ends. The headlines that had screamed Amanda's name for weeks were replaced by stories of local politics and the next tragedy somewhere else. Her face, once a fixture on the news, began to disappear from the public eye, her absence reduced to a cold file in the back office of the Redwood Police Department. The town's initial unity and determination, so fierce in those first desperate weeks, gradually unraveled. Volunteers returned to their jobs, search parties dwindled, and the prayer vigils outside the Pierce home shrank to a small circle of the most faithful. The flyers, once so fresh and hopeful, yellowed on telephone poles and store windows, rain and sun fading Amanda's smile until it was little more than a ghostly outline. Inside the Pierce house, time seemed to freeze. Amanda's bedroom was left exactly as it had been on the last morning she woke there. Sheets tucked in with careful precision, a half-finished drawing clipped to her easel, a favorite sweater draped over her desk chair. Linda dusted the room every week, smoothing the comforter, keeping the candle burning in the window each night. The ritual became a kind of lifeline, an act of defiance against the world's demand that they move on. In that small pool of candlelight, hope still flickered, fragile but not yet gone. Jim grew quieter as the months slipped by, his eyes growing more distant with each passing day. He stopped attending the community meetings, lost interest in the boats he once tinkered with at the harbor. In the evenings, he would sit alone on the porch, staring into the dusk, his hand wrapped around a mug gone cold, as if willing Amanda to come walking up the street, laughing and apologizing for scaring everyone. Ethan, still in high school, withdrew from his friends and drifted through classes like a shadow. Sometimes, he'd sit at Amanda's desk, sketching silently in her old notebooks, trying to keep her memory alive with every line and shape. Redwood itself seemed changed, quieter, somehow heavier, as if the air itself was weighed down by loss. Parents watched their children more closely, locking doors that had once been left open on summer nights. The Lighthouse nightclub lost much of its business. Even the thrill-seekers were haunted by Amanda's disappearance. Harbor Road, where Amanda was last heard from, became a road everyone avoided after dark, the memories too sharp, the danger too real. Amanda's story lingered, but in a different way now. It became a warning, passed down at sleepovers and whispered at campfires. Don't go out alone. Don't trust strangers. Remember Amanda Pierce. Her name was etched into the collective memory of the town. But as more time passed, the hope of finding her alive thinned into something brittle and painful. New tragedies filled the news, and with each day that passed without answers, Amanda's case slipped further from public consciousness. For the Pierce family, the world outside moved on, but inside every clock ticked with the memory of Amanda. Linda would sometimes dial Amanda's phone, just to hear her voicemail message, the recorded voice stubbornly bright and alive. Birthdays and holidays passed with a seat left empty at the table. Presents bought and wrapped just in case, then tucked away in Amanda's closet. Friends drifted away, unsure what to say or how to help a family stuck in a moment that wouldn't end. Even the police seemed to surrender to the silence. The file grew thicker with every passing month, filled with dead leads, contradictory witness statements, and the unyielding void where evidence should have been. Detectives were reassigned to new cases. The once constant updates to the Pierces dwindled to the occasional phone call or letter. "We're still working on it," they'd say. but the words felt hollow. The investigation, once the center of Redwood's world, faded into the background, a haunting reminder of the town's limits. And so Amanda's room became a time capsule, her belongings arranged as if she might step through the door at any moment. The candle burned each night, visible from the street, its small glow a silent plea that someone, somewhere, would remember and return her to them. In the dark, Linda sometimes whispered promises to her missing daughter, unwilling to let hope die, no matter how the world tried to snuff it out. Redwood went back to its routines, but nothing was ever truly the same. Every unexplained noise or unfamiliar face became a source of anxiety. Children asked questions that no parent could answer. The river kept flowing past at the town's edge, indifferent to grief or memory, while the Pierce family waited, together, yet each utterly alone, for a miracle that never seemed to come. Amanda's absence settled over Redwood like a long, unbroken winter. Yet even as the world moved forward, a single light burned in a bedroom window, a stubborn reminder that some wounds refuse to close until the truth is finally known. 6 years drifted by, heavy and slow. Time wore down the urgency of Amanda Pierce's case, erasing the sharp edges of panic and outrage, but never the ache of absence. Redwood seemed to hold its breath in those silent years, the story of Amanda's disappearance woven into the town's soul, a secret wound beneath the surface of daily life. For the Pierce family, every day was a test of endurance. Linda kept Amanda's room untouched. Jim made a ritual of checking the mailbox each morning, searching for news that never came. Ethan finished high school, his sister's memory the silent passenger beside him at every milestone. Summer storms on the Oregon coast were always fierce, but in July 2009, Redwood faced the worst in decades. Gray clouds rolled in from the sea, swallowing the sun and flattening the horizon. For 2 days, rain battered the town, transforming streets into rivers, sending branches crashing onto roofs and swelling the banks of the Redwood River far beyond their usual lines. Electricity flickered and died. People stayed inside, watching the storm through rain-streaked windows, whispering about floods and mudslides and the damage sure to come. When the water finally receded, the landscape had changed. The river, swollen with rain and debris, had clawed away at its banks and filled its mouth with mud and tangled driftwood. On the outskirts of town, at the edge of an abandoned lot that locals avoided, a fisherman slogged through the knee-deep mud, hoping for salvage or maybe just a story to tell. The lot had once been a dumping ground for old tires and rusted barrels, forgotten by everyone except the weeds and the occasional trespasser. What the fisherman found that day would change everything. Half buried in the mud was a woman's shoe, small, battered, and faded, but unmistakably out of place. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was weathered by time and water, but a pattern of blue flowers still clung to the fabric, stubbornly bright beneath the grime. The fisherman brought the shoe to the police, more out of curiosity than expectation. After so many years, most tips were little more than wild guesses or dead ends. But when the police laid the shoe out on a desk, memories came flooding back. Linda was called in to identify it. She broke down when she saw it, tracing her finger along the familiar embroidered flowers, the same pair Amanda had insisted on wearing the night she vanished. There was no doubt. It was Amanda's. The news hit Redwood like thunder. The newspapers, long since finished with the story, ran new headlines. New evidence found in Amanda Pierce case. The abandoned lot on the riverbank was cordoned off, swarming with officers and forensic teams. For days, searchers combed the muddy ground, sifting through debris and probing the earth for anything else that might tell them what happened that night. Every scrap of fabric, every lost trinket, was collected and catalogued. Rumors flared up again, questions old and new tumbling through the town. Had Amanda been brought there the night she disappeared? Why hadn't the lot been searched more thoroughly before? Who else might have known about the spot? So isolated, so easy to overlook. For the Pierce family, the discovery of Amanda's shoe was both agony and hope, and it wasn't the miracle they'd prayed for, but it was something. A piece of Amanda, a trace that said she had been there. Linda found herself clutching the shoe late at night, pressing it to her chest as if she might feel her daughter's heartbeat through the worn sole. Jim became restless, thrown back into the routine of waiting for news, unable to focus on anything else. Ethan, now a young man, went down to the river's edge himself, standing in the spot where the shoe was found, searching for answers in the churned mud. With the evidence, police officially reopened Amanda's case. Detectives returned to Redwood, their notebooks thick with questions. The lot where the shoe was discovered became the center of the investigation. Old suspects were called in again. Brian Keller's name resurfaced, whispered in grocery aisles, and shouted on online forums. Everyone wanted to know, had the police missed something vital all those years ago? The new search brought with it a surge of hope, but also fear. Memories that had settled, like dust in the corners of Redwood's mind, were stirred up all over again. People remembered details they hadn't thought of in years. A strange car parked by the river, a figure seen on a rainy night, an argument overheard outside the club. The past, long silent, was speaking again. Amanda's story was no longer just a warning or a cold case. Now it was alive, raw and immediate, the possibility of truth closer than it had ever been. The candle in Amanda's window burned brighter each night, the light shining farther into the darkness. Redwood found itself holding its breath once more, hearts pounding with the question. Was this finally the moment Amanda's mystery would be solved? With Amanda's shoe found at the river's edge, the town of Redwood pulsed with a new, uneasy energy. For years, the story had faded into the background, a cold ache that only flared up on anniversaries. Now, every conversation, every news update, every sideways glance seemed charged with possibility and fear. The police, once content to file away Amanda's disappearance as an unsolved tragedy, were suddenly everywhere, knocking on doors, canvassing the neighborhood, scouring old evidence for a clue they might have missed. Redwood felt on edge, as if the town itself was bracing for a storm. As the reinvestigation unfolded, detectives retraced every step of Amanda's last night. They pored over statements and recordings, their focus zeroing in once more on Brian Keller, the man with the red sports car, the last person confirmed to have seen Amanda alive. When questioned again, Brian told the same story he'd told in 2003. He had given Amanda a ride after the club, dropped her off near the fast food place, and never saw her again. His calm was unnerving, almost practiced. Yet this time, investigators pressed him harder, challenging the details and picking apart the gaps. As they dug deeper, contradictions began to surface. Brian's original statement about the time he dropped Amanda off didn't line up with witness accounts from the party or the timestamp on Amanda's last call to Haley. In fact, the route he claimed to have taken didn't match with a security camera sighting of his red car, which appeared farther east than it should have. closer to the abandoned lot where Amanda's shoe was discovered. The story, so smooth on the surface, began to fray at the edges. Then, almost as if the town itself refused to let the truth lie buried, a new witness stepped forward. An older woman, who lived in a faded trailer not far from the riverbank, came to the police station with trembling hands and a memory she had never quite shaken. She told officers that on that rainy night in 2003, she'd seen a red car parked by the edge of the vacant lot, its headlights off, engine idling in the dark. She remembered it clearly because her dog had barked wildly, waking her from a fitful sleep. At the time, she'd thought nothing of it, assuming it was teenagers drinking or looking for trouble. Now, with the news of Amanda's shoe, the memory returned with sharp clarity. Her statement sent a ripple of anxiety through the investigators. The timeline shifted. Brian had been near the lot that night, close to the river where Amanda's shoe was finally found. And yet, when pressed again, Brian denied ever driving that far, insisting he'd left Amanda downtown and never went near the riverbank. The contradictions grew starker with each interview. It was as if there were two Brians, one who smiled and cooperated, and another whose shadow flickered in the background, evading the truth. But Brian wasn't the only mystery. The whispers about a second man that had floated around the original investigation now returned with greater urgency. At the house party, several witnesses had recalled seeing Amanda talking with someone besides Brian, a tall man, face half hidden in the dim porch light, wearing a faded jacket. Back in 2003, these fragments of memory had seemed inconsequential, lost in the chaos. But now, in the harsh light of renewed investigation, they glimmered with meaning. Detectives re-interviewed everyone from that night, chasing any scrap of detail. Some recalled seeing the mysterious man step outside with Amanda. Others thought they saw him talking to Brian in hushed tones by the car. No one could remember his name, or even describe his face. He was a ghost in their memories, an absence that felt increasingly sinister. The idea of a second figure, someone hiding in plain sight, someone whose presence could upend everything the police thought they knew, kept the town on edge. For Amanda's family, hope was both a blessing and a curse. Linda found herself drifting between relief that her daughter hadn't been forgotten and terror that the answers, when they finally came, might be worse than the questions. Jim, restless again, attended every community meeting, his anger barely contained. Ethan, grown but still shadowed by his sister's loss, spent long nights walking the riverbank, trying to imagine what Amanda's last moments might have been. Redwood itself seemed to vibrate with tension. Old wounds reopened. Suspicion drifted from neighbor to neighbor. Even the familiar rhythms of summer, the clang of boat masts, the chatter at the market, felt hollow, as if the entire town was just waiting for the next revelation. And beneath it all, the chilling thought remained. If it wasn't just Brian, if there was someone else out there who had a hand in Amanda's disappearance, then maybe the truth was even darker than anyone wanted to believe. The question lingered everywhere. Who really had taken Amanda that night? And could justice, so long delayed, finally reach into the shadows and bring her story to light? As the investigation surged forward on the strength of new evidence and old suspicions, Amanda Pierce's story resonated far beyond the borders of Redwood. Her face, once familiar only to her family and neighbors, became a symbol of the countless missing women whose names faded with time, whose cases collected dust in cold, forgotten files. News outlets from Portland to Los Angeles ran updates on the case, sharing grainy photos of Amanda in happier days, her laughing eyes, the tilt of her head, the little blue flowers on the shoes that, for so long, had been just another detail of a vanished life. Detectives combed through every possible angle, driven by a new urgency. The memory of Amanda's final phone call, the contradictions in Brian Keller's story, the mysterious second man. It all circled like vultures over a wound that had never healed. Linda, Jim, and Ethan were swept into the media whirlwind, their grief suddenly public, their sorrow reflected in the eyes of strangers who saw their own daughters, sisters, or friends in Amanda's story. As Amanda's case re-entered the spotlight, another name surfaced alongside hers: Lisa Marie Young. Though miles and years apart, the similarities were chilling. Lisa, a bright and vibrant woman from Nanaimo, British Columbia, had vanished in 2002 after leaving a nightclub with a stranger. Like Amanda, Lisa had dreams and ambitions, a loving family, and a night filled with promise that ended in silence. Like Amanda, Lisa was last seen in the company of a man with a flashy car, her final phone call filled with fear and confusion, her disappearance haunting her community for decades. The connection between Amanda's fictional disappearance and Lisa Marie Young's real-life case became a rallying cry, a call to remember all the women whose stories remained unresolved. Online forums and true crime communities drew parallels, their posts filled with anger, heartbreak, and hope that justice might still be possible. The pain in Nanaimo was echoed in Redwood. Two towns, two families, united by absence and the longing for answers. For the Pierce family, the comparison brought comfort and pain in equal measure. It was comforting to know that Amanda's story was not forgotten, that people cared enough to keep searching, to keep asking hard questions. But it was also a reminder of how easily lives could slip through the cracks, how a promising future could be erased in a single night, leaving only memories and endless speculation. Linda reached out to Lisa's family online, sharing condolences and small comforts that only those who had lived with such loss could truly understand. The two mothers exchanged stories, clinging to hope even as the years kept marching forward. The similarities between the cases reignited debates about policing, community responsibility, and the dangers lurking in plain sight. Advocates for missing and murdered women used Amanda's and Lisa's stories to push for stronger protocols, better surveillance, more responsive police work, and public awareness campaigns urging young women to trust their instincts and speak up if they felt unsafe. Posters bearing Amanda's and Lisa's faces appeared in college dorms, bus stations, and bars, silent sentinels watching over crowds and reminding everyone that the unthinkable could happen anywhere. In Redwood, the mood was both hopeful and somber. The investigation, though energized, continued to run into walls. The second man remained unidentified, a flicker in the memories of witnesses, never quite solid enough to pursue. Brian Keller, questioned again and again, never broke under the pressure. The forensic search at the abandoned lot uncovered small, tantalizing traces, a hair, a fragment of cloth, but nothing that could conclusively link anyone to Amanda's disappearance. Each piece of evidence was both a lifeline and a heartbreak, another reminder that the truth remained just out of reach. For Linda, every update brought a storm of emotions. She kept Amanda's room just as it was, but now added newspaper clippings from Canada, photos of Lisa, and printouts of supportive messages from strangers around the world. She and Jim started attending advocacy events, speaking for families who still waited in the dark. Their grief turned into action. Ethan, older now, moved away for college, but called home every night, never letting the distance erode the bond he still felt with his missing sister. On the anniversary of Amanda's disappearance, the town gathered in the square. Candles flickered beneath photos of Amanda and Lisa, their faces illuminated by the soft light. Strangers held hands, united by pain and the stubborn belief that remembering was a kind of resistance, a refusal to let the missing fade into nothingness. The wind off the river carried the sound of voices, pleading, promising, remembering. Amanda's story, inspired by Lisa's real-life tragedy, was no longer just a Redwood story. It was the story of every small town, every family who had ever lost someone to the darkness, every community that refused to forget. In the end, it was a story of love's endurance, of a world still waiting for justice, and of hope burning like a candle in the night, flickering, fragile, and utterly unwilling to die. Years passed, and the world kept turning. The story of Amanda Pierce, like so many others, became woven into the quiet fabric of her town and into the greater tapestry of stories about loss, hope, and justice that never sleeps. Redwood learned to live with the ache, but the candle in Amanda's window never burned out. Her room, a time capsule of sketches and keepsakes, remained untouched, a sanctuary for hope and remembrance. The world outside moved forward, but inside the Pierce home, time bent around Amanda's memory, holding her close, refusing to let go. On the anniversary of her disappearance, the town gathered, as it always did, at the community center overlooking the restless ocean. Faces old and new appeared in the glow of candlelight, everyone united in memory and a kind of quiet resistance. They listened to Amanda's favorite songs, shared stories of her kindness, and spoke about how her absence shaped the choices they made for themselves and for their loved ones. People clutched candles, some in prayer, some simply holding on, each flame a testament to the persistence of hope. Linda and Jim stood before the crowd, their voices clear but carrying the weight of all the years lost to waiting. They spoke not only for Amanda, but for every missing daughter, sister, friend, or neighbor. We honor Amanda and all those like her whose stories are still searching for an ending. We stand for Lisa Marie Young, whose real-life disappearance has inspired this story, and whose family still searches for answers. Justice may be delayed, but families never stop searching. The truth matters, and it must not be forgotten. Their words echoed over the water, their pain and their hope shared by everyone present. With the case reopened, detectives continued their work, fueled by the renewed energy from the town and the lessons learned from past failures. They pored over old leads and new witness statements, leaving no stone unturned. The candlelight vigils, media campaigns, and community meetings kept Amanda's story alive. Social media buzzed with hashtags and digital flyers. Strangers across the country sent messages of support, promising that they, too, would remember Amanda and Lisa, and that their stories would not fade into obscurity. For young people in Redwood, and in places far beyond, Amanda's story became a cautionary tale and a call to awareness. The lessons spread by word of mouth, by teachers and parents and friends looking out for one another. Stay alert when you go out at night. Trust your instincts, even when you feel awkward or afraid. If something feels wrong, leave and reach out for help. Report anything suspicious immediately, no matter how small it seems. Lives can turn on a single moment, and the cost of silence is too high to bear. Ethan Pierce, grown now and living his own life, carried his sister's memory with him wherever he went. On quiet nights, he would pull out her old sketchbook, tracing her lines and shapes, letting her dreams bleed into his. He became an advocate himself, speaking at colleges, organizing awareness campaigns, always reminding others that the missing deserve to be remembered, that justice only comes when we refuse to forget. Redwood changed too. More streetlights illuminated the town's dark corners. The community invested in support groups, outreach programs, and better training for law enforcement. The story of Amanda, its heartbreak and its hope, sparked real change. Parents talked to their children about safety, about trust, about the risks that could hide behind a friendly face or a dark road. What was once unthinkable had become a part of the town's identity, not as a curse but as a mission to protect others. Lisa Marie Young's name continued to surface, her story entwined with Amanda's. Across the border, her family's search pressed on, undaunted by time or silence. The parallel between Amanda and Lisa became a symbol, a reminder that these wounds reach beyond borders, beyond families, beyond the limits of a single community. Some wounds can only be healed by the truth, and that healing starts with memory, with action, and with the courage to ask hard questions and demand real answers. As the sun set on another anniversary, the light from Amanda's window could be seen all the way down Pine Street, a beacon cutting through the darkness. Those who passed by paused, some with bowed heads, some whispering a prayer, others simply making a promise to themselves to keep watch, to stay vigilant, and to care for those who might otherwise slip through the cracks. And for those who listened to Amanda's story, on the radio, online, or from the lips of a neighbor, the message was clear. Subscribe to our channel, help keep these memories alive, and push for justice in stories without an ending. Share Amanda's name, share Lisa's name. Remember them not as victims, but as lights that will not be extinguished. Because even in the darkest night, a single candle can shine farther than anyone dares to believe.